Thank you.
Welcome to the CAPC workshop. It's July 9th, 6 p.m. here in the Eureka Springs Auditorium. I'm Steve Holofield, Chair of the CAPC. This is a workshop. As a reminder, we're not going to make decisions, vote on anything. This is just an open forum to discuss. And then one thing on our agenda is funding requests. So we also do not call roll since this is not a regular meeting. So anybody want to get started?
Yeah, am I allowed to make a motion to add something brief to the agenda? Can we do that at a workshop?
Um,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah, you know, one, I like things to be advertised ahead of time in case other
Sure,
people want to
okay.
come and talk about it. But
I'll put it on the agenda for the CAPC meeting then.
Okay.
But I mean, just for the public transparency, I want to discuss why we don't discuss applicants in advance and we just make motions to nominate. I think it's important that we have a conversation about that, so I will put it on the agenda for next meeting.
sure,
Thank you.
that's perfect. If anybody else has anything they want to bring to the meeting, they do it. Okay, who wants to start on funding requests?
I'd be happy to do that,
Mike?
only because I've had probably the maximum amount of experience in funding requests going back to 2011. One of the things that's been of interest is how other cities do this, and it varies to a degree, but it's somewhat standardized. So I did a quick analysis today with staff on the cities of Rogers, Conway, Bentonville, Little Rock, and Fayetteville. And I've got a little one-pager here. One of the components of both Rogers and Bentonville is the number of rooms that are booked. And in fact, because of the way Rogers at one point in their A&P, before they became a Convention and Visitors Bureau, they only collected on rooms. They did not collect on restaurants, and they still don't. But in order for an organization to come into Rogers, they had to almost guarantee the number of room nights they would bring based upon the funding request. And both Rogers and Bentonville do something very similar, that after the event is over with, they have to show the rooms that were actually booked by going to those individual properties and getting the results. And if they didn't fulfill the room requests, for instance, if they said they're going to bring in 1,000 rooms and they gave them $5,000, they would go ahead and cut that funding down based upon the lack of rooms that were taken. Well, it sounds kind of strange to do that in a way, and it might be very difficult to do that in Eureka Springs. But the point being is it required the organizations to do their homework before they went to the request for the funding. Take it a little further, the city of Bentonville only does funding requests 3 times a year. And the reason they do that is because funding requests, as we know, will take a lot of time every time we have a meeting. We have been kind of victimized, I think, in the past by people coming in day of the meeting and wanting to come in and apply for a request. And unfortunately, we have tended to let them do that. So Bentonville has a procedure 3 times a year. City of Conway probably has the most incredibly lengthy procedure that I've ever seen, but they have one thing that's sort of critical that we have talked about many times is how long can you get money from a CVB or an A&P. First year, an applicant can get up to $5,000. Second year, a maximum of $2,000. And the third year, $1,000. After that, there is no guarantee that we'll get funded anymore. And that was the other thing that I noticed in all the cities. There is no guarantee of continued funding into perpetuity. Now, you can kind of weigh that the way you want to. If you have a big event that continues to come in and brings 2,200 people every year, you're going to look at that very seriously to determine the economic impact of an event like that is massive. So you don't want to necessarily exclude some organizations. The only other thing that I think was interesting that I saw was, and we don't have this in here, but it does make a lot of sense, monies cannot be used to fund bankruptcy. And when you think about that, it was in almost every one of the applications. In other words, they don't fund bankruptcy opportunities for an organization that gets into trouble that all of a sudden can't pay their bills. You can't use those monies for that because, again, it's taxpayer money. So I thought these things were very interesting, and in the ability of our organization to take a look at how those monies go out, I think we do need to insist that homework is done prior to coming to the meeting. So.
Heather?
First, I apologize for, there's some typos in this. It was done rather quickly. I would have normally liked to put together a deck. I just didn't have time.
Let me guess, while you were on the beach in Belize.
No, actually, it was today, about an hour before this meeting. This is kind of a brain dump of things I've been thinking about, and some of it is a repeat of the what Mike just passed out, and I'm going to quickly go through it. I started with copying and pasting the mission and purpose of the CAPC, because it's like, what really is our mission? For those of you who haven't seen it, the CAPC About page, they added brief bios of the CAPC staff, which is awesome, but we don't have our mission and purpose on the CAPC website that I could easily find. It may exist there, I just couldn't easily find it. I had to go to the city website to get it. So I said, okay, this is our mission, this is our purpose. How are we strategic in accomplishing this with our event funding? And I thought about categories. And so legacy events, we kind of talked about that last time. These are events that have been successfully held, let's say three, any number you want. I put 3 in there, but it could be 5 years, it could be 2. And they've consistently had a proven track record of driving economic value to Eureka Springs. It's strategic because these events represent established success. They continue to, we support them, it ensures their success, and it continues the tourism of the people who repeatedly come back to Eureka. New events. We also don't want to rest on our laurels. We want to be diverse. We want to be innovative. We want to support new events. So first-year events, do they have great potential to attract out-of-town visitors and to generate economic impact for us? These are important. We want to stay fresh. We want new demographics. Nonprofit. This is the one that I think gets sticky for us. I really thought about this a lot because we have a lot of nonprofit requests, and I thought, they do contribute culturally, artistically, historically to the community fabric of Eureka, even though their primary aim is not direct lodging revenue or restaurant and lodging revenue generation. But what it is that those events represent the character of this town, and the people of this town are why people come back. So there's a strategic importance paragraph. I won't read it ad nauseum. I think we need to be thinking about that, our values. People care about values, and by supporting nonprofits, that intrinsic value that exists within Eureka, and they do a lot for this community. And then I put 4, but really, I think this should be its own line item. We've talked about it several times, and that's like parks and cities. Those efforts, they enhance public spaces, they provide community engagement opportunities. We saw the ribbon cutting when Basin Park reopened. It was awesome. Sam did an incredible job. They directly contribute to quality of life in Eureka Springs. I think that needs its own line item within the parameters of the law and our bylaws. Saying what's the clarity of the mission, making sure that we're enhancing transparency and accountability. And then we're having really a focused resource allocation by separating these efforts. We ensure that our market support funds for legacy, new, nonprofit, or whatever categories we want remain concentrated on those initiatives, and anything having to do with like parks or city, is separate, so we can really directly and measurably look at market support funds, and it's not jumbled together. Another thing I know that might raise, we spent 90 grand about in 2024. Our budget for 2025 was 75. I know why we did that. We exist to promote tourism and to advertise the town, and that is a tiny budget for event support. I think we should increase it. I did a little bit of math. I actually think it should be more than what I put here, but I was like 20 to 25% maybe. stimulate growth, enhance our promotional reach. Really think we need to invest in data and measurement, like Mike was talking about, and I'll get into that in a minute, maintain our competitiveness. Other destinations are continuously increasing their funding and allocating budget for us. You know, we remain a top destination for people. I put some proposed numbers in there. I'm not married to any of this at all. It was just kind of a brain dump again, but like those that are really proving themselves, do we allocate more? We need to think about that, or do we allocate more to new events? Streamlining the process and stricter parameters. Again, this is a repeat of what Mike just proposed. I really think we need to do a better job at this. I think that applicants for legacy events really need to start showing quantifiable data to us. There's no reason that they shouldn't be tracking data. And I don't ever go into a client and say, give me money, and I don't have data to demonstrate why I should get this money. But at the same time, for those who are not schooled in how to do that, I think we need to be thinking about how to teach them how to do that. We need to be thinking about some sort of template or matrix where they can say, do I meet these criteria? We have something already that exists. I think we can streamline it. I think we need to have a new requirement of earned media tracking. I think that if they're paying for paid media tracking, if they are paid for, paying for media, where are those numbers? Why aren't we getting those numbers? I have yet to see a report from anyone who's gotten funding from the CAPC who's placed a Facebook ad or who's placed any kind of social media ad, what the performance was and what the ROI was. I haven't seen it. And if somebody has presented it, I apologize that I don't recall. If you're giving someone tax dollars, they should be giving us the data back. Again, the training for recipients, and then the stricter adherence to guidelines.
Could I just ask Mike, do we ever get that data from people?
Well, it's a good question. I was just making a note here. One of the reports that we got back this past year for an event was one of the best ones I'd ever seen. And it did get into tracking very nicely. Most of the things we see are basically hurriedly put together and sometimes not even very nicely put together. The post-analysis reports, such as the ones that are done by, for instance, the City of Rogers, are very comprehensive because they want to know if those rooms got booked. The one thing I would say, Heather, and I think it's a great point, is that Bentonville does something in terms of its tracking. They want to know who was there, but they only want to know what their zip code is. Mm-hmm. They don't ask what their name is. They don't ask anything else. They're interested in what their reach was, and I think that's kind of an interesting.
I agree with you, and I apologize because Carving in the Ozarks, I want to stand corrected. Carving in the Ozarks did provide that data. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So but out of this lengthy list, mm-hmm. That is the only one that I can recall. Yeah. Maybe Zombie Crawl as well.
So maybe I feel free to open dialogue here, I think, unless we get too rowdy. I'll call it in.
Why are you looking at me?
Don't get rowdy, David.
So
I'll make a comment real quick. So when we do have people come up and, you look at how many beds and stuff, but it's their very first event.
Right.
They don't even have that data.
Sure.
So we've been encouraging them, please make sure you collect this data. Go out and at least do a straw poll.
And that's where I
with your
think a template would be helpful for them.
Yeah.
And some kind of guidance to say, let's set you up for success.
Right. Because I know Danielle sits down with them and tells them how to turn in the receipts and make sure they put the logo on everything and really spells it out for them so they don't have an excuse saying, I didn't know about that. Well, when Danielle sits down with it, they don't have an excuse for that. So maybe a step further and going, can you collect the data to prove back to us? And if it means for them to come back to us next year and really prove that we should give them more money a second year, that might motivate them to do that. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all. And then it's just like stricter adherence to the guidelines. I think that, Rob and I had a little bit of this discussion at the last meeting, and here we are, we're in July. I think it's kind of difficult to say, okay, in the middle of the year, we're going to start really enforcing. I think we have to make a commitment to say, January 1, 2026, if you do not submit your application 60 days in advance, it will automatically be rejected. We need to adhere to the same rules and guidelines for every applicant, regardless of who they are. The last thing that I'm going to say is this. I have received multiple calls and emails about religiously affiliated businesses receiving benefits or funds or free advertising from the CAPC. I am the one that raised that when it came to one of the parades, and we consulted with the attorneys, and they said it, just to be safe, best to avoid. I don't want to get into the politics of all of that, but I really do think that we need to be careful about how we're using tax dollars. If we have a town tagline that says you're free to be, and we're diverse and we're inclusive of everyone, we need to be thinking about where those dollars go and if the businesses that we're advertising and promoting represent those values. I can say that I have directly had encounters with one of them where I have been called horrible names because my personal beliefs don't align with theirs. And that's fine. They are free to be that way and to believe that. But however, whether tax dollars should be going toward that when they feel that way about many other members of our town is questionable. And when I have businesses writing and saying it's not cool, we exist as an arm of the government. And so we do need to consider that too. And I think we need to be consistent with what the lawyers told us and the guidance they gave us. So,
I mean, that's one of, I hand you out the list. I mean, I went through our support list from TIE, what we ever get, and I kind of try to go through each of the application and see what are they actually saying about the budget, how they are using the funds, what was the budget last year, and stuff like that. And so if you look at the numbers, I hope I didn't make any mistakes. I think I just went through each of the applications we had. And there's clearly events, they lost money according to their information. And then there's others, they made significant profits, and some of them, there's a good point, what you said, Heather. I mean, like some of them, they need the money. We have, if you read our guidelines, it says, for example, that we are not supposed to fund something for maintenance and improvements of a building. So this is where we're going with requests from the museum, historical museum. I mean, they clearly use the profit of their effort to use for the maintenance of their museum. It's one of the income parts, and that's one of the things we kind of have to think about when we consider their applications. Then we have others. The money goes to places which are not even in Eureka Springs.
Right.
And where do we make the differences? And I think we had in our guidelines clearly lined out that we generally would only support like 3 years. And we want to see if an event is successful and if it produces or if it has an impact on our tourism. And then, like you said in your paperwork, thank you for that, they might become a legacy event, which is, something which is cool, good to have, and we want to keep supporting it. But the question is, how much do we have to support these, especially if we see that they are more than self-sufficient?
right.
So it's like, my thought was on that part, maybe we say, okay, we'll go to 3 years, and after 3 years, we will only go, my idea was like, okay, we'll cut it in the 4th year to 75% of our maximum amount. We have a $5,000 limit per event. So we would say in the fourth year, if it's a legacy event, if it keeps going and we see the impact, that we say, okay, we'll only support you 75% of that amount as a max. And if it's on the fifth year on, if we think this event is important, we only allocate not more than 50% of that max amount we would give to a new event. So that way we're kind of keep the support, but we kind of back out a little bit and say, hey, like, you should be self-sufficient, and we want to have the diversity that we have, new events, and we want to support them. But of course, if it's an event which just literally wastes money and nothing else, then it doesn't should not have our support any longer. That's right.
Okay. Mike, could you address the museum while we give them money? They're kind of a special situation, so I didn't want to lose that in
I know.
the
Well,
process.
number one, the museum is not a market support fund. We do not give them money out of that. It is a line item that we created some time ago. The reason that we have done that is basically because they also serve as the only visitor center that we have on Spring Street or Main Street at this point. Now, to suggest that they're using the money for maintenance, I don't know. But what we do know is every time that we get an invoice from them, we get a visitor count of how many people came in and also some analytics as to where they came from. So I'll give Jeff a lot of credit. He's done more homework than we ever expected him to do in that $600 a month. Again, they serve as a visitor center for us, and I think the impact they have is okay. But,
Well, like jailbird.
but no, it does not come out of market support funds.
My information on that part, it's based on their application. It asks in the application,
Oh, I see
what
what
are
you're
you using the funds for? And Jeff put in there, he's using it for the upkeep of the museum. So I'm not making this up. And I understand the money we are spending is not going directly to that, right? It will, of course, he will use it for the adequate items what we can support, like advertising. But then, of course, he wouldn't use that money for the advertising because we are reimbursing him for that, and he can use the money for the rest.
But then, I
And
guess
that's
I'm
totally fine, but
confused.
there's the gray zone.
I think I'm confused because I guess, in essence, doesn't everybody use the proceeds for where they see fit after proceeds come in from an event? As long as they're using what the monies we allocate are the ways that we've determined they should be used, then what you make afterwards, do you see
Right.
what I'm saying?
Right.
I guess I don't get.
That's what, if you look at the Excel, what I put out there is like the use of the profit. NE, what I put it there, NE means like next event.
Okay.
So most of them say, okay, we use the money, the excess money what we have, it will be used as a starting point for the next event. Because we have to pre-finance whatever, we have to prepay something. And some of them didn't give us any information. And then others, if you have a D, the money goes into it used as a donation. And let's see, what else? And then there's a mix of it, but NE, the meaning is like it will be used for the next event. So not everybody is like starting from scratch every year, even the
Right.
returning.
Sure.
That's the thing, yeah.
But the money we give them, they can't carry
That's-
over from year to year.
Right.
Right, and of course, what you said, the money what we spend, it has to match with our requirements.
Right.
It has to be for the ads
Right.
or whatever, and that's totally fine. And I'm sure that the person who controls the requests that when the bills are coming in, that's your job, Mike or Danielle. I don't know who's doing that, to make sure that the money is properly spent according to our guidelines.
Right.
Maybe I'm just misunderstanding because the way that I heard it made it sound to me like you're concerned with how the person is spending the profits that they make if they make profits from their event. And to my understanding, we don't get to dictate how they utilize those
I think
profits.
it's that the line is blurred because we're not supposed to give money to the museum, like in certain ways, I think. But Mike, I had
Excuse
a
me.
quick question. So is Jailbird Were Jailbird Ball and Long Hair Invasion a separate line item that aren't marketing funds?
No, they're market support fund requests.
Okay, so I guess that's kind of like
Those are
what
events.
Rob is saying, like, it's this gray area of, are we supposed to be doing that? I think it's not an emotional question of, I would love to fund the museum much more, but are we supposed to legally be doing that?
You could probably draw a line in the sand in a real simple way, that we do not fund fundraisers.
Okay.
And a lot of organizations in the state of Arkansas do not. In fact, they discourage that. So if your intent basically is to raise the coffers because you're fundraising, then that's not really a reason to go ahead and provide market support funds. The best reason that we do this is what you pointed out to begin with. It brings people to town. It's $5,000 worth of advertising.
Right.
And that's really the way we look at it. But to the point is the legality of, for instance, the ministry, the legality of doing something that is a government organization anyway that's being supported, that does call the question. So,
Or what about events which have a ticket price? Like, we had this discussion about, when Good Shepherd came in and they were doing that fundraiser at Grotto or upstairs. And we had our conversation about that. It was like, that's a fundraiser.
Yeah.
And then we kind of had the problem, like, hey, we like the Good Shepherd, so we kind of, passed it on. But this is one of those gray zones, And same thing, you have bigger events which have they have a ticket price. People pay to participate in the event, and on top of that, we support them. So it's like, that's completely different to, let's say, what was that? Like, for example, the chocolate event, chocolate festival, people were paying for the chocolate. Yeah, this is kind of like where we need to find the solution.
the way you get around that is it's a donation.
I think
You buy a $100 ticket and it's a $100 donation.
Right.
yep.
Pretty much any nonprofit that we help out is fundraising. That's all. They're in existence to
That's
raise
what
money.
we're
not
saying is, how
allowed
else do we
to-
fund, how else do people fund these things if you don't have different
But I guess
avenues to
the
get
thing
funding?
is that if it's a nonprofit like the museum fundraising, and then we fund them, and they use the support indirectly even for maintenance, we don't have a way of saying, no, our $5,000 that did not go to the maintenance because this was a fundraiser. I think that's the gray area.
But isn't it supposed to be clear cut when they turn in receipts that
They turn in
show,
receipts, show
yes,
what
I
they used it
used this for postage, yes, I used this for advertising. And then it's kind of like child support in essence. If you give, a mom $500 in child support, but she spends $500 on groceries that feeds that child, but she buys herself a $500 cell phone, you don't get to be like, oh, my $500 went to the cell phone. There has to be some way to differentiate.
Sure.
And say that the person is using conscientious.
Right. David?
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to bring up. Number one, this list, what Conway and Little Rock and all them are doing, this is a very good guidelines to follow. I like these a lot. One of the things that I'm noticing more frequently now with events that we fund, these organizations are choosing host hotels and host bars. I don't think we should be doing that at all. We're not funding something so that all of the hotel bookings can go to XYZ hotel. That's not fair to everybody else. One of the other things that I've noticed is that we fund these individuals or these groups, and it's very clear that our logo has to appear on every landing page, whatever. And I've called a few of them out, and the way they're getting around this is putting up a very, very opaque
Yeah.
faded out
Like a
logo.
watermark of sorts.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, I've missed it several times.
Interesting.
You know, we need to make sure that that's black and bold on every freaking page
I did not know.
that fundraiser is going to appear on. And then getting back to Mike, I mean, you did this, right, Mike? Okay. So for like Rogers, when an organization says that they're going to provide, or they can generate 100 room nights, I'm all for, you need to prove it. You need to prove that you did this. We get way too many organizations that come up here and they're saying 650 room nights. Well, guess what? That's not what happened. Just like the instance where we have an organization claiming that the entire month of revenue for CAPC or for the city was because of their event. I have big problems with that.
How do you clearly quantify that the people are actually staying in the rooms for the event?
Well, Mike had mentioned the organizers or their volunteers need to actually call these hotels and say, hey, do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, every hotel.
Well, I recognize how I would get that data from my guests. I often ask, what brings you to town? How can I help you? And I can get a feel for what's bringing my customers my way. I was kind of curious, how do you get that as sort of a hard...
Because I don't track it. I couldn't tell you what people were here for Corvette Weekend or Jeep Jam or whatever, because I just don't track it.
Right.
Should I? Absolutely.
Sure, maybe.
If they called you and asked you, could you tell me how many people stayed in your place?
I can tell you how many people stayed at my hotel that weekend.
But for
I don't-
Corvette Weekend?
I wouldn't be able to tell you.
That's kind of
why.
more what I was wondering is how would you know that it's actually due to the event versus just maybe a really fortunate
Of course, they
week?
can ask people who sign up for the event, did you stay the night at a local
I mean, we can
hotel?
certainly ask that in our check-in process, but we don't.
Although I guess also event organizers could be responsible for keeping tabs on the metrics of who's coming from out of town and who's, I mean, that.
Their application says, how many nights are you staying in hotels here?
Yeah.
Diversity does that. I think diversity.
I like to,
survey.
we got a gentleman
Hey,
way over
Inky
there.
19 Thomas, hello everyone. My mic is hot tonight. Must be bright out there. So I was going to give you a little background on at 2016, Robert was around. We were sitting at the table having this exact discussion, and it's been had many times over the years. One application that Mike had at the time was called Cision, and Cision could tell you actually what the value of ad placement, magazine articles and specials on the news. It was very valuable. It was expensive. It was another one of those discussions that we had is to say, does the CAPC really need to spend on this? We said yes. Mike made a lot of use on that, and it gave him some visibility to see when an article was picked up about an event, what the value of that advertising is. We really are blind to that. I don't ever know what happened to Cision. Do you, Mike?
It got absorbed by another company, and if I'm not mistaken, there is a similar organization that does that. We, through Madden, when there's a PR story that's run, they have a way to go ahead and track what they consider the value added of that is. On the same token, we don't have that. We don't have Cision anymore to be able to do that, but I loved it.
Yeah.
I logged into it every day because it also tracks stories that maybe did not get picked up by our PR agency. So.
From a Mardi Gras angle, that's a very valuable aspect to say that these extra things that we're not paying anything for have a gigantic value for the community overall, and it's hard to come and prove exactly how much exposure there was for a particular event. But I see a couple of topics here that we get lost in, and I always approached it after thinking about it was, what is the CAPC's real responsibility? And that is to voice vibrancy and charm to the outside world. That was always what I looked at an event with is, I don't care if it's ticketed or they're staying in one hotel, whatever else, sure, those are all valid points. But really what we're saying is we will provide money if you can show the world that there's charm and vibrancy in Eureka Springs. It's why I push the Mardi Gras event so much more than other events, because it's truly at a season when there's not a lot of vibrancy and not a lot of charm going on, and I think that that's a very helpful situation. I would compare Mardi Gras to more like May Festival of the Arts. I think that's where the concern really comes, is when you have a $35,000 line item and you don't hear a lot of where's the reports, what's the, what was the real impact of that, where are the rooms nights for May Festival of the Arts. I'm not sure exactly internally how much gauge there is on that, but we could also go to Folk Festival and say just how effective is Folk Festival on a grander scale. Sure, it's bringing vibrancy and it's bringing charm, but there's a much bigger price tags than a small amount of marketing funds going to an individual event for somebody who is putting a lot of effort into putting something on in Eureka Springs. The way I always looked at it too is, I guess I'll share, there was no real score sheet at all in 2016. It was the same topic of how do you know exactly what these people are bringing in. We developed a sheet at that time that kind of guessed at what's the average room rate. Well, how much is an average meal? Is this a one-day festival or two? And we threw a dart and said, so if you say that you're going to have 500 people walk through the doors, we figure that those 500 people are going to eat this much, they're going to sleep this much, and we came up with a value. If that value was remotely close, meaning if you took the 3% off of the retail spend, if it looks like they're going to generate $1,500 and they're asking for $1,000, it really didn't matter the rest of the arguments because they're generating their own money anyway. We wouldn't have that money, which brings me to the next point is, when is the event occurring? If the event is occurring at a time that we don't have occupancy anyway, then it's really good idea to promote that event. If it's a happening, and this happened with the Eurekan used to be in August. It was a very valuable event in August. It filled a lot of rooms. Somehow or another, we had a commission that was kind of asleep at the wheel, and they put them right in the middle of July, and then they funded them as well. It just didn't make any sense. And I love the Eurekan, holy smokes, that was great. But at that point, you're really trading visitor dollars and bedrooms. You're bringing in people who were running a race, enjoying the backdrop of Eureka Springs. But at the same time, we had those people, and it becomes where even Zombie Crawl gets to be really touchy, and I've had many conversations over the years about this, because Zombie Crawl is at a time that we can replace every single one of those guests with leaf peepers, fall foliage travelers. It's not difficult at all. So I'm not saying defund Zombie Crawl in any way. I think it's worthwhile. In those instances, I say it really comes down to what type of demographic is Zombie Crawl bringing into town. It's bringing in a young demographic that's going to come to Eureka over and over again. So I think all these pieces of the equation of the when and the how does it fit on our backdrop of the overall vibrancy of the town, does it trade rooms, are pieces of the equation that are very important that I wanted to point out that we've brought up in the past. Also, there's a $5,000 cap on marketing funds. That's because Mike Maloney put that cap on there in 2018 before he left. At the same meeting, Rick Bright passed that there was 2 times that you could ask for marketing funds, one in the spring and one in the fall. All the spring marketing funds had to be in by sometime in October or November, all the ones for the next year. So that's already in place per the minutes. I don't know where it went. It just got dropped in the last commission somewhere. But if you wanted to reenact that, every single finance person at the CAPC, that will help them immensely to try and process this all at one time. And it'll help you as commissioners to kind of hear what's going on. Now, the last point I want to make is one mix of topics, which is visitor services. The museum has always had a nod from the CAPC as a visitor service center. If you go in there, there's not a bunch of rack cards. It doesn't necessarily operate as a visitor service center. They'll answer questions. They're not going to send anybody out the door. But that $600 per month is just a line item to help fund the museum. That doesn't have anything to do with the vibrancy, et cetera. I mean, it does in a vicarious way, but there's no marketing fund request. But I think that's where it becomes a little odd, is when they're having ticketed events and they're raising money and we're pushing their event, then it's like, okay, well, now we're funding you as a visitor center, but we're also funding you to help the event. I don't really have a problem with that when you go back to the vibrancy and charm scenario. Does that event add vibrancy and charm? Absolutely it does. Is it pretty much at one location and is it ticketed? Yeah, but that's okay. But if he only has the seating capacity for 300, then a $5,000 request is probably not important. How much money is he bringing in from those $300? Well, you can backward calculate it. You come up with the 3% off of that revenue, and he's due $800 in marketing funds, whatever it is. And that takes out the equation of, well, he's had it for 3 years. It doesn't matter to me if he's had it for 3 years. He can have it in perpetuity. If they always bring vibrancy and charm and they always bring the same 1,000 people, we owe them a percentage of whatever that amount of money was because they earned it. If they earned it at a time where we traded dollars, then I say, okay, I appreciate that you earned it, but we would have earned it anyway as a CAPC. You can see I'm turning the CAPC into a business, but that's a part of the equation is where do the funds come from? Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I want to pick up on one thing real quick. The others events, I mean, we want to have events coming back, of course, you know, but then the problem is if we have high or very popular events, I mean, if I look to the applications we had, there's a few events in town, they happen, and nobody applies for a penny from us. And if we are too easy to get money from, we're kind of open up the door for others to say, hey, let's say, for example, Volkswagen Weekend. Nobody asked for money from that event. And if other events ask for money, other car shows ask for money, we kind of open up the door and say, hey, well, try it, you know, like, so we kind of have to have a stop at some point how far we can support an event. And that's the gray zone. We kind of have to define when do we stop and how far can we go. And I mean, the museum, that we want to have a museum. It's the same thing like we need to have a shelter. So we kind of have to make sure those things can operate. But then on the other side, it's like, well, we pay a lot for the auditorium. Do we want it? Yeah, kind of like it would be a shame if the auditorium would close the door because nobody pays for it. So we have some kind of must things. We're forced to support even if we think like, well, you know, like, yeah.
One of the things that may help in this particular situation, and let's take a car club, which is a really good example. A car club has its membership. They're coming here basically to have a good time, and they probably don't care if tourists come and see them or not. It's just the fact that they're here, they're showing off their vehicles, and that's pretty much the end of it. Do they need, you know, money from the CAPC to go ahead and hold that event? No, not really. They've done their own marketing, they've got their own club, they're doing their own Facebook advertising, their own invitations, and, you know, maybe they charge fees to do it. I think that's one area that we can certainly take a look at and make sure that, you know, you're doing your own thing, you're doing a great job. Please come back.
Yeah.
Mike, could I ask a question? And excuse me in advance if this is not, my brain is not fully formulating. We're talking about like these legacy events, and let's take the New Year's event. It was more of a collaborative effort where we worked with different parties in the city for Bash with a Splash. Are there so I put under additional suggestions for enhanced impact, like explore further collaborative marketing opportunities. What does that look like if we say, hey, there are some legacy events, and maybe Bash with a Splash becomes one of those? Mm-hmm. We are involved, like we're saying, CAPC is part of this. How do we look at other events to say, we're not necessarily just giving the $5,000 or $2,000 or whatever, but we're actually like part of it, folk festival, et cetera. What are those criteria? And how do we say maybe we want more of that? Maybe we don't, but maybe we do.
That's a very difficult question to answer in 5 seconds. Bash with a Splash, oddly enough, was supported in part by the state of Arkansas because we did apply for a grant and we received that, and we're going to be doing that again. In fact, next Wednesday, I'll be meeting with Susie Cowan, who is the head of basically Arkansas Money, and we'll have an event over in Fayetteville with our Northwest Arkansas Tourism Association. But she's going to lay out what is available for us as a region, but also individual towns. There are festival grants that are available every year from the state of Arkansas. And we probably need to encourage our town to take advantage of those grants that come up, because generally they're not big grants, but they're $5,000 in some cases. And they're the type of grants that you could have if you want to have a watermelon eating contest. You might apply to the state and get a grant. So those things are available to us. But in terms of creating additional legacy events, that's one of those things that we've had I guess we've benefited from one in particular, Springtime in the Ozarks, for over 40 years. And in the past, I think, they upped their ask a little bit in the past couple of years, I guess, but they used to ask for like $250. And that was to send postcards out to basically the people that they wanted to make sure could come in. When we did the analytics, and Damon was correct, when we created that sheet of coding what it would mean, something like Springtime in the Ozarks generated thousands of dollars in tax revenue. And we had to look at that very seriously, because it was $300,000 or $400,000 in room nights. It was a ridiculous amount of money for food. And then, again, we were taking 3% of that. That really, really looked good on paper, and it signified the fact that these types of events really do deserve our attention very carefully. But with a situation such as we're talking about with the museum and the blacklight ball and the long hair ball and so forth, that's an area that probably does deserve more scrutiny. And I think if Jeff was here, he'd argue the point, and I understand why he would. We've been funding the museum for as long as I can remember. In fact, we used to buy their television advertising on AETN. It was the Eureka Springs Historical Museum and the guy up the street that sells the chocolates. That makes chocolates. Those were pretty interesting things to do. On the same token, it advertised the city of Eureka Springs. And it became almost a landmark, for people to say, wow, I saw you on AETN. Didn't know that was such a good deal. We were running on Antiques Roadshow, oddly enough. But to answer that question, that's a very complicated one. And I don't know exactly where you go. It is based upon how much money we can put into the fund. The reason that we went to $75,000 this past year is that when Ty and I were trying to do this budget, we were trying to cut every nickel out of everything we could to try to get it to balance. Yeah. And we couldn't do it. So we came to you and said, this is what we have to do, and you said, okay.
Yep,
I would probably suggest, and I agree with you, I'd like to see that go up. I would rather go ahead and have more money to give because, again, it's a dollar invested back in advertising for the city.
I mean, our goal is to be diverse and have as many events as possible a year, and might as well, even if they are not always dollar by dollar coming back. But on the other side, we're presenting an image of Eureka Springs that we're active. Something you can come to the town, and there's always something going on. And the tourist itself, I don't think that they measure in any way, like they don't care if somebody's making a profit out of it or not. They want to see entertainment. They want to be entertained, and they want to have fun. So I have another quick question on the guidelines. Can you elaborate a little bit on the funds can be used for? We have like creative design of advertisement by source outside the funded organization. What exactly is that?
Well, you could go ahead and hire somebody, for instance, an artist, to come in and design a poster for you that isn't maybe a member of the organization.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, one thing we could change on our marketing, on our how to use, if we simplify how the money can be used. Like, yeah, it says events, an events internet website development and management. To me, there's a gray zone. If somebody starts working on a website, a lot of money gets spent very quickly. And I'm not sure, I don't see a lot of websites actually doing a lot of event stuff. Like I think our own Folk Fest is probably the one which is the biggest one. And then the Blues Festival, I think there was a lot of stuff done. But most of the events, they don't really have a website. And there's, me, it's like, how much money, I mean, website designs can be very quickly very expensive. And is that really, and that doesn't really help a lot, and it's hard to measure how much that helps. But if we have printed brochures, for example, we can measure that. Or if we have ads placed in a magazine, we can measure that easier. So would it make sense to cut down a little bit on where we use the funds for?
Robert, I actually absolutely agree with you on that. One of our components today is social media, Facebook, Instagram, so forth. Those are the resources that probably by and large, I'd say more than 80% of these organizations utilize, not design of a website, because that is complicated, and really after the event is done, what do you do with it? Well, you've got an old website. You may have bought the URL, you may have done all those things, but unless you think you're going to reinvigorate it again the next year, then it's just a dormant website that doesn't go anywhere. So I think I agree with you on that. When we put those things together, that's a long list that was created a very long time ago because we had so many people trying to manipulate the way they were doing things. And we had it this year, believe it or not, with a person who came in the day of our meeting demanding funding, and we gave him money. Then when he turned in the receipt for the hotel room in Wisconsin, we became a little wary of why in the world we would do that. Well, obviously, we didn't pay for that. So we do look at those receipts when they come in to make sure they are legitimate. And there are some instances where we've had to say, you can't do that. But part of that is we have got a lot of complication in there, and I think we really do need to review that and hone it down. So I'm in total agreement with you.
One of the things I always think about is how many people will this event bring to town? And that's almost a litmus test in my head. And when people come to us and say, I want to do this bike fest or plein air festival, how many people will that bring to town? If it's something that's really something for once they get here, there's something to do. But, that's not really our purpose to do that. But even though we do give some money for that, it's very complicated. But if you look at Preservation Society's Christmas tour of homes, and I'm not knocking it, or I'm not advocating not to give them money, but they sell a finite number of tickets, I think 1,000 tickets, and they stop. It's one evening for 4 hours. They make, I'm just guessing, $30,000 that one afternoon, and then they have pretty minimum expenses. Even the tickets have gone online. They don't even print tickets anymore, just the little books. So that $5,000 that we give them is, if we said, no, we're not going to give you $5,000 anymore, it would be taken out of the $30,000. So this nonprofit organization who does a lot of good in town would be minus $5,000. So they make it $25,000 a year, and every year past it, apparently, because they don't seem to be motivated to change it at all. It's like, it's 1,000 tickets and that's it. It's one night and that's it, So that's the hard part. It's like these are organizations that do good, that people do come to town for those homes of tours. I'm not sure how many people spend a night here. This may be more of a day tour thing. But,
it almost raises the question if we should have like a seasonal funding amount. Like in December, a $5,000 grant has a much higher value because you probably have a problem to really recoup that money for the CAPC. But if it's an event in the middle of the summer where we have a lot of tourists coming to town, it's easier to say, hey, we had, 5,000 people coming to town, and yes, that money is well spent. So it's like, but then, spring, January, where the town is dead, when we spend $5,000, the return on investment is probably very little.
To go back to what Mr. Hinkie said, if this is an event on a weekend that there's nothing going on, maybe we should give that a little bit more, a few more points, thinking, well, there's no one coming to town. If they'll do something that brings people to town, then maybe that's something we should look at because it's an off time, you know?
But we would have to measure it and
So
see if there's an
complicated.
effect.
I wanted to say something, sitting at a table with 3 lodging owners, so don't get mad. We have to remember that we also exist for the restaurants too.
Right.
And when people come in for the day, they do eat. We don't exist solely for the lodging.
But if they come in for 2 nights
And so,
or 2 days,
exactly,
they eat
they are
twice,
eating.
so.
And so that is something for us to consider as well. And they like to eat. They rave about our restaurants.
Yeah.
So I do think that I just don't want to be too short-sighted in saying we're only about filling beds.
No.
Absolutely, that is very important. But we are also about filling seats at tables.
Right.
And so we need to remember that too.
If we could, I'd like to make a suggestion here, and I'm going to do 2 things here. Number one, this is the entire form for the city of Bentonville. That's the entire form. This is the 11-page form for the city of Conway.
11.
wow.
And this is the form for Little Rock. That's it. Now, let's go to Rogers for just a second. Rogers is like 14 pages. It goes on and on and on. And the post-event form, which is the one I like the best, this is what you have to fill out to get your money to begin with. I think that where we are going right now is, number one, consolidating a lot of the things that we already have and refining them. I really would like for 2 things to happen here. Number one, on our coding sheet that Demon helped us put together back in 18 or whatever it was, we now have $65 allocated per day for food. We have $115 allocated per room night. When we looked for the very first time yesterday at ARDNA, which we'll talk about at our next meeting, the average room night in Eureka Springs right now is about $200. Now, we don't know what the food is, but I can tell you that it's not easy to go any place for an entire day for $65 unless you go to, I don't know where. But the point being is I think we've got some wrong numbers in there that we need to adjust, and that those numbers probably need to go up. We have some old regulations in those forms, you know, and we were doing things a long time ago that you can't use your money for trophies or plaques or, you know, love letters or flowers. Those were things that were pretty standardized. And I think what we can do is just articulate that right up front with people when they come in. One of the things that I do see with Rogers that I really like is that before you get your money, you've got to sit down with a counselor, and they got a guy there. And you really talk through the event, and you go ahead and hone that thing down, and you explain right up front the cans and the can-nots. And I think that's really where we need to go. And then at the end of the day, when they leave, they filled out this little checklist form, this sign that says the logo will appear, the advertising will be 50% out of the state, you can't use this money for yourself, invoices have to be turned in, about 5, 6 different things. Sign it, and that becomes the letter of the land. And then at the end of the event, they come in with their post-event form.
I'd like to add to that, collect information about the people that attend the
Zips.
event.
Zips.
The only thing, I would like to have the average rate, the $200. If you pull it out from AirDNA, I mean, that's only Airbnbs, and that they're all automatically higher priced. I'm not sure if that will give us a good average, you know, like, I mean, hotel prices, I mean, the hotels on 62, none of them is $200, not even the Best Western. I mean, the Crescent, of course, they probably are $350 to $800, depending on the room. The historic downtown hotels are probably in a similar area, but I don't think David get $200 on his place. I don't get it on my place. And the surrounding hotels, we don't charge $200.
Well,
I think that the 115 is still a good number to use.
You know, if we raise it 10% or something like that, I
Right.
think that's fine. But what my point being is that the numbers are a little low, and, you know, the average rate based upon Airbnb obviously is going to be much, much higher. But I think we need to go ahead and realistically take a look at that slight increase there. What does it mean to us? Not that much. But what it does mean is that when we're trying to calculate the return on the $5,000
effect.
investment or $2,000 or whatever it is, it gives us a little bit more to say, okay, this event will generate some income. And that's really what we're looking at too.
I wanted to go back to Heather's comment or question about maybe it's your place to bring in festivals. An example happened earlier this year in January. In fact, New Year's Day, I met Sherry Hansen. She was telling me about a mandala event that had happened a couple of times at the Basin Park Hotel, and it sounded like she was willing to bring them in again. It's the monks make the mandala on the floor. It's 8 by 8, whatever else, then they sweep it all up after. She had presented that it was going to cost about $3,000, $3,500 by the time it was all said and done. No marketing funds included. This was just keeping the monks up, flying them here, etc. I was like, well, you won't qualify for marketing funds, but there's no reason that you can't have a contract for service from the CAPC with that. So I relayed that to Mike, and he was aware of it, but I encouraged her to call each of the commissioners to try and drum up some support. It seemed that most of the pushback was you don't qualify for this particular event because we can only fund marketing funds, and she wasn't able to articulate, no, what I need is a contract for service. But in my humble opinion, I think that it was in like the second weekend of August, a back to school time that wasn't really heavy. There was no other events going on, and it made a lot of sense to just spend $3,500 to bring some monks in here, make sand for 4 days, they sweep it up. The amount of, again, of just generic marketing exposure you'll have from an event like that is pretty incredible. And I don't think we could have paid for the marketing to get the Eureka Springs name out. Less than $3,500. In my opinion, you were getting, $25,000, $50,000 worth of marketing off of a single $3,500 event because it would have gained a lot of organic traction. It happened to match what's charming and vibrant about Eureka. There was a lot of pieces of the equation that kind of match what's happening in Eureka generically. So my only point back to you was, I think if there's a time, now I don't know if there's ever a time that you want us to come and say, will you pitch a festival to the CAPC, but I think that's certainly an opportunity. And what I would say is, I don't know how this got started, but for years, the Bluegrass Festival was predominantly hosted by the McClungs. We paid, I don't know, we took it off because it just didn't make sense. It was $10,000, $12,000, whatever it was. But that was hotel rooms for all the players that came to town, lots of different dynamics of venues. It was a pretty good festival. That the attendance had dwindled, and we really could never prove that we were getting the money back as the CAPC. So Bluegrass got killed, and all the appreciation, I think they felt like we didn't appreciate them for not going forward with that festival. But at the time, the CAPC just couldn't decide that it was really profitable and should be continued. There's another story. Jazz Festival has basically, that wasn't so much a contract for service as it was just the CAPC actually putting on the festival. And then we had a classical music festival for a while. That wasn't contract for service. I believe that was just the CAPC putting it on. But there's been plenty of examples of where we tried to go out, do an actual festival where the CAPC actually tried to run it internally or went to an organization and said, hey, would you mind running this festival for us? And with a contract for service, obviously, and May Festival of Arts is roughly like this. Here's the expectations that you must fulfill to fulfill this contract. Then there's no convolution of funds, which I'll step into back to the Rogers Lowell Chamber of Commerce and their CAPC. It's in the same building. It appears that there's all kinds of convolution of funds, but there's not, because there's contracts for service for every single aspect. This is what you do for visitor services. This is what you do for economic development. This is what we do as the CAPC. I think that could be brought to the table much more frequently to say there's an event able to sustain the attendance. Let's just jump to Mardi Gras right quick. What I was talking about last year was one of the local restaurateurs wanted to have a crawfish festival. Well, it was going to be about $3,000 at the time, that because we were going to use one of the same bands that were already in town. By the time you put this together, Ron was able to do sound, but it wasn't a marketing fund request. It was really hey, Mike, what do you think about a crawfish festival that's in conjunction with Mardi Gras on this particular weekend, but we'll have to spend some money on this stuff? And really, it was a question for all the commissioners, and I may have called you, a few of you at the time, because that would be something that you could push forward as a contract for services to say, absolutely, we want a crawfish festival in conjunction with Mardi Gras. Here's how we would do it. And then we would mark off, yes, this restaurant will have these things. And we're not asking for food. His food would be, he would make profit off the food, et cetera. It was really just paying for the band that was already in town, which was going to be half the price. And we couldn't do it in Basin Park because it just wouldn't fit with the logistics. We were trying to do it between the courthouse and the auditorium. Anyway, too much detail there, but back to you, if there was an opportunity in a structure like that, I think then it becomes clear that, yeah, there's some festivals that you could ask for to say, hey, would we, let's just say Volkswagen wasn't here, it was at Branson, but we wanted it here. We could literally go over to the Volkswagen folks and say, hey, would you like to come move your festival over here? We'll pay for a band, et cetera, and you would have a contract for service that says, this is what happens if you bring this festival here, and these are the pieces. So there's a path to it, and it's not necessarily complicated. You just have to know exactly what you're asking for in that situation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually did write back and forth with Sherry. They decided to go to Fayetteville in the end.
So where do we go from here? I like the idea of updating the form. I like the idea of cutting down the number of things that our funding covers. I think that needs to be updated. I think the formula on the price of overnights and meals and stuff needs to be updated. And, you know, it's out of date, of course.
I like the idea of just having 3 or 4 months out of the year to request your funds instead of every single month.
I think that I agree. And I think Mike said Bentonville does it like 3 times a year, and I was thinking once a quarter because it is Eureka. So I don't want people to feel like we're trying to create barriers, but I definitely think creating processes will help. And so that was, I think, maybe once a quarter would be cool.
I do like that, but I also, will that help encourage people to come up with stuff between the busy times?
Yes, and I feel it will also have them, if we announce that we're only going to do this 3 or 4 times a year, then they're not going to be planning an event at the last minute requesting funds for that last minute event.
Oh, yeah, they will.
Which, yeah.
They always will.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah.
I mean, if we look at the events what we have, I mean, it would be rude probably to say, you know, we don't support any car and motorcycle events, period. Because they come for other reasons. They don't need the CAPC support. I don't know if that's harsh to say something like that, because we want those people to come here, but the question is like, when you have a ticketed event, or should we ask for a portion of the ticket? Say, hey, if you have a $50 ticket, we want, you know, $3 from that ticket for reimbursing our expenses.
And their event flops, then we lose too.
Pardon?
If their event flops, then we lose too, right?
Well, right, we spent the $5,000 already, but that way, the thing, what I see a problem measuring, you know, how many people stayed in a hotel, that's really, I mean, I do ask my guests sometimes, you know, where they're coming from, but or for, and of course, if you have certain events and if they show up with the right vehicle, you know, like, oh, okay, you're here for this, you're here for that, you can kind of, but I've noticed a lot of times, especially this year too, that people came for, and there was an event going on, and they said, oh, you're here because of that. Huh? Never heard of it. So it's like, and then you would measure those people and say, oh, they came for that event, and they don't even know about it. And then what we said about the food, the restaurant, yes, we have a lot of day travelers, more than before, because when you see downtown is busy, but then the parking lots at the hotels are empty, and at the end of the day, then the downtown is empty, and the hotel parking lots are still empty. That tells you like, oh, they left again. So like, we need to find ways to measure, but we can make the doctor work on this and make it very complicated and kind of make us more busier than we want to be. You know, like, I don't know how far we want to extend this whole thing.
I don't think we'd want to become the people that runs around town and measuring. I mean, people in your end are here for this event or that event. I think we push that back on the event. You tell us through your tickets and through your applications and stuff how many people came to your event, and then you have documentation that says, yeah, I'll spend 3 nights here on my application, or I'll buy tickets for 3 nights or whatever. Not to run to your
we should put the proof on the
them.
applicant and not on us, right?
Well, and
Agreed.
it's also just not feasible. I mean, the different places have different draws to why you would come there. You know, we're a romantic destination primarily at our place, and so we draw less people for events and more people coming to get away together. So that's going to be real different.
You can't even count Jeeps for the Jeep Jam because there's people here that have a Jeep that aren't doing anything with Jeep Jam, you know?
And some of those things like, or as I see it, some of these events and stuff are, if I'm not booking people because of it, are an opportunity for me to go out and talk to people and things and give information about my place. It's an advertising opportunity. So just because I didn't grab you this year doesn't mean that next year you're not going to be at my place.
Yeah, and then you have events like the zombie crawl. Obviously, the amount of people who are coming for the parade, they don't stay here. I mean, they're coming from all over the neighboring towns because it's a big event. Totally fine, and probably half of them, or I don't know, maybe a third of them, won't even consume a lot of goods in town. They just come for the parade.
But every hotel room in town will be sold out.
That's true. And then on top of that,
So what do you
every
Hopefully.
magazine article that shows a herd of zombies going down the road piques somebody's interest in Eureka Springs, which in turn brings bookings for other weekends that aren't zombie crawl. I mean, we could spin our wheels all the time trying to quantify the value of all these different events, and that's a very hard thing because
I mean, if you look at last year's event, I mean, we had, what was it, New York Times or something? Who found us, you know, like, I mean, that's amazing.
Today Show.
And I mean, I'm not criticizing the zombie
Today
Today
crawl, you know,
Show
it's
on NBC.
Yeah.
the way of measuring things is really like, we have to put it on the applicant and not on ourselves, you know, and we kind of have to find a way that they have to prove that we can say, hey, okay, of course, like big events, we can see it ourselves that it was probably a good success, and others are more difficult to figure out, were they really a success?
If we look at reporting, and it's probably in here, but I went back and looked. So diversity and zombie crawl, you look at the numbers following, that was the highest amount of collections all year. I went to zombie crawl. I could not get out of downtown. Literally, I could not move. I think that the amount of publicity we got from the Today Show and New York Times because of the horror film festival, I mean, you could probably quantify the dollar value. I'm not going to, but we probably couldn't have paid for that type of publicity, to your point, that booked people later on. And then, people saying to me, oh, I'm in Belize, and people are like, oh, Eureka Springs, Arkansas, I'm dying to go there. Literally, somebody said to me, I'm dying to go there. Did you know that that's the center of the universe?
Oh, God.
I'm not kidding, and it's a true quote. And so people are telling me in Belize that they've seen Eureka Springs, Arkansas. I was at a resort where they were having a retreat, and their theme was free to be. Yep. So I kid you not. I kid you not. So, and that was the event organizer telling me that that this is the center of the universe. So I think that we are not getting, all of the quantifiable data we can. We never will, but we know that people are interested because of these events and because of the attention that they get. And I think that that's important to remember too.
Yeah.
Well, there's 40 events on this page right here that we funded in 2025. And, we'll have probably a similar number as we go into 26 as well. What was it, last month, we had $950,000 in public relations, quantifiable because of the articles that ran in Southern Living, in Good Housekeeping, on television, and so forth. We benefit tremendously from that type of PR, so we're definitely on the map. I think the biggest hurdle for us probably is to go ahead and manage the income of these events and how we evaluate them. And I think that's one of the things that I like about, going to a quarterly type of an event where it becomes a place where people have done their homework before they get here. They're not trying to make it up as they go because they know that they're going to be in competition with other people for the funding. But when we split it up that way, it gives people a chance to breathe as well and create something perhaps for the fourth quarter that maybe we haven't even thought of before. I'll give you a little cat's out of the hat preview of one thing that we know already, and we saw it yesterday because we got our first look into air DNA. And I'm not going to go very far with it because Ty will hit me. But what we saw was what's called pacing. Pacing is how we are booking into the future. The month of October in 25 coming up outpaced last year's numbers already. We are that much higher, almost by 16% in bookings already done versus last year. So we know that we're on the map for these types of things. Our two biggest months are July and October. Now, July seems like a funny month, but we seem to do well in collections despite the fact we don't have a heck of a lot on our calendar of big events, but we do have a lot of people in town. We do track, to a certain extent, our parking passes from our meters out here. And every month we do get a reading on that, and we also get a reading from transit periodically of how many people were taken around. Over the weekend, 2,100 people were given rides to Lake Leatherwood on our trolley system. So those are big numbers, and those are people coming to town, some of them local, some of them not. But we know that those numbers always are going to skyrocket and rise because of that. So let us do this. Let's go back and trim some of the stuff we've got off here. I really do like the suggestions that everybody has made in reference to how we go ahead and take a look at the organizations. And then you can treat it the way you feel you need to treat it. But let's go ahead and sort of give our commission the opportunity to have commission meetings, but not every meeting is a funding request meeting. Because if you think back last time, it was contentious. And we spent a lot of time just kind of going back and forth. And we didn't accomplish that much. The other thing that I want to do is I would like to see the applications, not the way we phrased it, I think is incorrect, Robert. We've said we want to see your application for your event in 2 months. And we've done it. I think what we really want to do is see your application so that we can have 2 months to look at it. Would that make more sense? So I'd like for everybody to have the privilege of being able to evaluate things, then ask questions if they want to. I think that's a better waste of, not a waste of our time, a better usage of our time.
I think also we could look at having, instead of maybe a workshop, have funding requests.
Yeah.
Just all that is funding requests. 1 month and not have a workshop or have both or whatever. But I think having the funding requests and then having the meetings, it just drags on and it's tiring,
I mean, so I pretty much what Mike said, I think that's a good idea. I made 3 points like, well, let's start with just have 4 quarterly dates where people can apply, but I wouldn't use the quarter of the year, March, June, because we don't want to have funding requests on the December meeting. So we would use January, April, July, October, and then like Mike said, we should have the 2 months at least, or maybe we have to say 3 months to get the time properly that there's no misunderstanding, and then the cutting down of the use of funding, that definitely would help. And what do we think about fundraisers? How much do we want to support fundraisers? If the money goes to financing the next year's event or the next event in general, I see that rather than the money goes will be used for donations for something we cannot control. I mean, like, yeah, our money will not be, I understand our money, what we spend will not be used for the donation itself, but it frees up money for them to use it for donation. So it's just a way to look at it, but technically our money goes to a donation. I mean, there's not a big difference. So if we quit, if we see there's a fundraiser, we just say, like, I'm sorry. And I would be, you may have to repeat this on your paper, Mike, what you got from those 5 destinations. Fayetteville says fundraisers are not favored. So they do help fundraisers, but they don't favor them. What about the other ones? You may have said it, I don't remember.
They vary. I mean, that was the point I was making. We've got Bentonville with a 2-pager and Conway with an 11-pager. It depends on how deep you want to dig into it. The one thing that Danielle just pointed out, and I think it's a good idea, November, February, May, August would be the dates that we do these things. November, February, May, August.
Yeah.
Bentonville just has three, March, June, and September.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, Bentonville is March, June, September. So you could squeeze it any way you want to. The one difference we have, though, and to Shear's point, we're different than Bentonville. We really are, because Bentonville and Rogers do conventions mostly, and that's really why they created the term Convention and Visitors Bureau, because some people that's what they do. Rogers just happens to own the old J.Q. Hammons facility, so they really want to book those conventions, and that's really their lifeblood. For us, we're a tourism community, and everything we do is regarding the tourism component of restaurants, retail, lodging, and having a darn good time while you're here.
Mr. Hinkey?
Just real quick, the one thing that I think would be super helpful, we've talked about this since 2016, but we've really never come up with it, and that is basically the door-to prize, because it becomes a problem as a commissioner to say, I don't want that person to walk away with 0, so there becomes this negotiation of, can we come up with some number? Madden needs vibrancy and content to push out there on social media and in advertising. It's not like we're not going to, if Volkswagen came to town, to use Volkswagen because it's been mentioned, we're still talking about Volkswagens in Eureka Springs. It's a giant event in August that's going to receive exposure. It's going to receive social media exposure. Those have value, and it has value to that organizer. I think you're just on a slippery path when an organizer walks up and has actually put a dollar value down and says, hey, I appreciate, we're working our rear end off there for your city. We appreciate a little kickback. When you tell him, no, I'm sorry, this is the policies, whatever else, it just kind of feels like a kick to the gut. If you could at least tell him, okay, well, we can't approve this number, but this number isn't that far off of what we're already going to do for you. We'll have social media post. Madden will probably mention you in multiple sections of different advertising. There'll be a picture of a Volkswagen on the front cover of the Fun Guide. I realize you don't control that, but there's a lot happening there that will make an organizer feel good. It's really more of a negotiation tactic, so you're not just sending him away from the microphone. And I always envision that as you qualify for our in-house program, so you will receive exposure for your event. Don't feel like we're not going to say anything about, and this works for the museum ticket events, fundraisers, etc., so that you can give them a nod and say, absolutely, thank you for your help in supporting the town. Here's what we'll do for you as the CAPC, but it doesn't actually take marketing funds out of your budget.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I think we got some good ideas here and some feedback and suggestions. I think unless anybody else has anything to say, we'll kick this into Mike's lap and ask him to earn the big bucks and come up with some good ideas. And
Pass the hat. Pass the hat.
I think we probably we may have to have another workshop over this, like with a proposal or a rewriting of our guidelines, and then with the information we just gathered today, and see or the consent, if there's any.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead as our team comes together, and we'll package this up, and what we'll do is we'll send it out to you, okay? And that way you'll have an opportunity to respond back to us and give us suggestions about how you feel about it. And if you want to tweak it, do it. that's
If
why
you want to
we're-
put on the agenda for the meeting to make suggestions or changes or anything, make sure Danielle gets that before the meeting. Our next meeting will be July 23rd, 6 p.m. in 2 weeks. We have 3 candidates to vote on. We have the 2 that's already. I assume they're still interested. And then we have a new one that's been submitted. So, and also on the agenda, please, Danielle.
You have two new
Okay, 2 new
applicants.
ones.
Two new.
I only got one of those, so.
You got it this
4,
afternoon.
yeah.
Oh, I got in that other.
It just came in now.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll put on the agenda to discuss how to pick candidates. It's up to us as commission to decide
But
that.
we have to put that somehow in front of the voting, right?
Yeah.
Because that's your point.
Yeah, put it before the vote on the candidates.
Yeah.
So we decide how to vote on the candidates. And,
Gotcha. Yes, the process before,
Yeah.
yes.
and we need to start talking about 2026 budget. So, and when, maybe the workshop. So next, at the meeting, please bring ideas for the, I guess, the August workshop, see what we need to do. Okay? Anything else for anybody?
I just want to say thank you for indulging me in my Word
Their
document,
misspellings.
my typo.
We understand. Anything else? All right, workshop is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.